there's lots of things I liked about Wandering Stars. I loved how you would jump from character to character. It felt connected, but also I felt very quickly I was just inside their head. Even the way they spoke to each other, the way you wrote, the back and forths, it was just a very and just to be inside their heads. And I wondered how arduous the process was to jump from character to character and figure out what their own head felt like.
I'm happy to hear that. It's a more interior novel than they're there.
Yeah.
And some writing teachers will tell you not to do too much interiority, but I feel like fiction alone can do that. You get scenes and straight up scenes in TV and movies in spades, and it's done very well. And you can't really outdo that on the page, honestly.
Yeah.
Having live people act it out and seeing scenes.
And knowing how our visual cortex works, the brain just does things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So interiority is something that I love about fiction, and that fiction alone can do.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a distractible writer, so I like jumping around to different characters. So I'll be working on somebody in 1875 who's at a prison castle, and a kid who's thinking about Minecraft.
Yeah.
But they're both native and they're in the same family line, and I really like. I like jumping. I always have several things going at once because that's just the way my brain is.
Are you postcarding out different scenes of characters?
I'm not. I run a lot, and so I find that long distance running generates some kind of structural thinking for me.
There's a great throwaway line about roller hockey in your book where you talk about it being like a dead sport or something.
Oh yeah, it is. It did die. It died at Huntington Beach, live on ESPN.
It died?
They were showing it. They made it to ESPN that level, but by the time it got there, and hockey, I'm sure. So roller hockey's always kind of been like, the step.
I used to see people playing it in Venice all the time, right? Yeah.
It's a Southern California thing, probably the biggest that it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because we would come down from Northern California for tournaments when I played.
Amazing.
I played national, level. But the place that it died was Huntington Beach. They had ramps in the back.
Mm-hmm.
They went from puck to ball, and everyone was wearing like neon colored short, like their equipment was ridiculous.
You just knew it.
It was the most embarrassing death of a sport that already was not respected.
I'm just curious, from your own perspective as a writer, are you actively trying to put you in it, or are you actively trying not to?
I think there's a part of me that gets a lot out of sneaking myself into it.
Right.
So, like somebody who knows me really well can do a double read and they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But there are aspects of that are completely fiction. Whatever is beyond me is usually the better thing. And so I try to work the characters to get them real enough that they go beyond whatever facts or interiority things I can include for them to make them feel real.
Right.
So it's always a mix, and I write fiction instead of memoir or nonfiction because I like to hide behind the fiction and be able to play with like, this is real, this is not, to process, even like to feel things through them that are like my experience or as intense as my experience, and wonder at what that might be like.
What do you do when you're writing? Because one of the things that I think are really important for anybody who is not Indigenous, not a Native, to talk about is how it's not just an amorphous people. It's not one tribe. It's not one people. There's lots of stuff inherently because you're talking about something that maybe somebody who isn't Native wouldn't know. But how much are you trying to figure out, like, I don't know anything about this aspect of the culture. I don't know anything about this gender. I don't know anybody. What's your process to figure out for these characters? Because they're so round, so rich. They're broken, but they're lovely, and they don't know they're broken. And when they do, it's honest. Right. There's a lot of that. How did you figure that out?
It's really trying to get at humanizing. I think Native people have been characterized or caricatured and dehumanized so much. Mm-hmm. I find that just leaning into humanity and giving all this historical context kind of allows the maybe the non-Native reader to get how human they are. Mm-hmm. And because it's been something that's been taken away from us. So I really just try to get at complexity. I think we love to see human people, flawed people, because we know deep down we all are.
Yeah.
It really just always felt refreshing to try to describe messy humans.
Well, the messiness kind of erases the otherness in a way, because everybody looks at it and says, "Yup."
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to get. The popularity also comes from people accessing the humanity. And there's subtext there to people understanding what I'm trying to do toward, having Americans and, other people, because it's been translated into 30 languages. They're there, and this one's at like 10 or 15.
What a trip.
I know that people can connect, and that's what, is beautiful. There's something human happening that people are connecting to.
For those who don't know anything about you personally, you weren't set out to be an author. That wasn't the plan, was it?
No, the plan was to become a professional roller hockey player.
A professional? You were that good?
I got sponsored at the age of 16.
Dude.
And I was traveling, I went to Canada twice and was at tournament level, getting MVP kind of.
You were there.
It was real. Like, I had friends that went and played professional Europe. After the sport died, it's still professional. In some places like Italy and France still have leagues. So it was a real dream that felt like this is possible. And kind of grew up, as a young man, being encouraged to do sports is like, that's where your value is. I didn't grow up in an academic home or a home with readers. So
you grew up in a mix of a hippie, but also religious home.
Yes. Right. Well, ex-hippie, because she became evangelical Christian.
Your mom.
So it was a very religious household, a lot of God. So having grown up very religious and having decided I didn't want to do either of their things, I was reading for meaning. So I was reading psychology and religious books. Like, I was reading the Upanishads, which is kind of a crazy religious text. And the Quran and, just all these different major religious texts. And then kind of stumbled into fiction where somebody like Kafka was writing with this, what I read as an urgency that kind of fit what that needing was.
Why meaning? Why were you looking for that?
Early 20s, and growing up with this major emphasis on God, there was there was something that fell. I was trying to figure out if it's not all that, what is it?
Do you remember when you realized it wasn't that?
Yeah, it was pretty early on. I mean, I was like legitimately trying to do the Jesus thing because I was afraid of hell. And
Same. That's it.
Literally, I mean, it's the most manipulative thing you can do.
Yeah.
You're going to suffer for eternity. If you're a thinking person, what that actually. I would be up in bed at night thinking about like eternity. And you're suffering the whole time. And so, I tried. And, I was the last time I went in front of the church and had them lay hands on me. Where they could be slain in the spirit. Yeah. And the guy came by, he was knocking people down along the row, and he tapped my head, and my head just went back and then came. And I was I was trying to do the thing. Yeah. And that was the end. And I found roller hockey soon after that.
When you start to peel back the layers, you start going, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
The history of colonization, all that stuff.
It was more confusing because my dad prayed to Jesus.
Right.
And so his devotion was directed at Jesus. And, his first language was Cheyenne. Right. And he grew up in Oklahoma. And so there was confusion. And, once I started going to Native American church, and I was around ceremony enough to decide it's not for me.
Right.
And my dad didn't necessarily take us aside and teach us, we knew stuff that other kids didn't know. But that was just some, family stories and just a general distrust of the U.S. government. But there was a lot I didn't know. And I think this whole idea of colonization and Christianity is something you learn about. And, and it doesn't take much information for you to start to put the pieces together. So I was in my 20s, after starting to read and becoming part of the community where I started to feel like the fucked upness. Yeah. And started to become pretty, it's much less rageful, but pretty upset at Christianity and distrustful of anybody who was hardcore in that direction, including my parents.
Right.
And, I think writing in Wandering Stars, I kind of have I approach Christianity from this outsider view. And I think I was able to write through some of, the complexity of it, not feeling resentful and not feeling the rage and just feeling what would it have been like to first encounter Christianity? Like a character, Jude Starr. Yeah. He hears the story about virgin birth, and that's a Cheyenne story. There's literally a virgin birth, but pre-contact, the story already existed. Right. So if you hear it, you must think there must be something to this God book. Yep. If it matches our holy person. Right. So it would be a confusing thing that I wanted to build in compassion and not just go after Christianity. And I was at a museum in Sweden, and they gave me a tour of the museum because they had art stuff. They had Southern Cheyenne stuff.
Right.
They were like, "Do you want to see it?"
Is that the museum that said your people were in Florida?
Yeah.
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 Which, were they or they weren't?
They were.
They were. Yeah.
So they were at this prison castle.
Yeah.
And this was this deep part of the history of boarding schools that Southern Cheyenne specifically were part of.
Right. In Canada, we call them residential schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, after finding that out and finding out, I was interested in it just as a piece of history. I didn't know how I would include it as part of the book. But then I stumble into this idea that it's from the Bible.
Yeah.
And, boarding schools and Christianity are also tied together, just like with colonization.
Right.
Once I realized there were enough pieces that I could connect the two. Yeah. And then you have, him reading the Bible and finding out where, and then, these guys were picking their own names.
Yeah.
And so, like, if he connected to this passage, why would he not pick this book as his name? Like,
did you get meaning? Did you have a different relationship with meaning now? You said you were looking for meaning in those books. Yeah. Where did you find it?
In fiction.
Yeah.
Fiction fit something in me that was complex. It wasn't trying to give you answers.
Yeah.
It was like, here's what human worlds are like walk in them, feel them. This is what humanity is like. This is people looking for meaning also and wondering at what it means without having to land on answers and turn it into dogma and, scare people into believing.
That's right. And I suspect that at some point you didn't see yourself in the modern context, a fan of music in a lot of writing. Is that true?
Yeah, no. The writing that I got into was a lot of global literature, work and translation was what first got me. There was a book, the only Native book I remember growing up was called The Education of Little Tree. Mm-hmm. And come to find out more recently, and a lot of people still don't know this, a lot of people still hold that book dear in their hearts. Yeah. It was written by an ex-Klansman.
Lord have mercy.
He was pretending to be a chair. Yeah, he was a speechwriter for George Wallace, who wrote the line, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. The party wasn't extreme enough for him, so he left. He disappeared and came back years later as Forrest Carter. He was Earl Asa Carter, as the speechwriter. Came back as Forrest Carter, wrote The Outlaw Josie Wales. Clint Eastwood makes this movie, this now famous movie. It's at the beginning of Clint Eastwood's career.
It's an incredible film. Chief Dan George in that, I believe, right?
This was his same Klansman guy.
Dude.
And then he went on to write this coming-of-age Cherokee story, pretending to be Cherokee, got long hair, and was just telling people straight out, like, he's Cherokee. There's all these theories that his white supremacist friends have that he was actually trying to spread white supremacy messages through Native storytelling, something about, like, getting back to nature and who owns the country, and it's crazy stuff.
Or did he switch? Did he learn?
No. He died right after Education of Little Tree came out. So he was just pretending.
We hear a lot about Pretendians as a phrase now, the Buffy St. Marie story and others, but that's one of the gnarliest ones. George Wallace's speechwriter.
I know.
Holy fuck. I mean, the level of distrust, how does that ever get bridged?
The level of commitment.
Yes.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, and with Buffy too, though.
Yeah.
You have to commit hard.
Yeah.
If you're going to.
She did a lot of great work.
Yeah.
But the betrayal is, I think, you know this, that people don't know how to talk about these subjects, especially in media, especially in journalism. So many of the conversations I've seen with you have rarely been about writing or the books. It's you're the spokesperson and you have to deal with this stuff all the time. Can't imagine that's the most fun always.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is it's good to know that this is the conversation that's happening.
Yeah.
But
because it didn't exist for a long time.
Yeah. But I know more about books because I spent a lot of time working on them.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be a spokesperson. It's not what I should be. We have 574 federally recognized tribes, almost 400 not federally recognized tribes just in America alone.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how many
nation after nation in Canada.
But there's, hundreds.
Yeah.
And these are all, different people with different worldviews and different histories. And while there is a certain unity that we all have because we all carry a lot of the same trauma and same stories and even some of the same cultural values, I think we need more diversity. And this book is about urban Native people, and so is there. And that's not something we've seen. We're working against, decades, if not more than 100 years of this particular depiction in film, especially, but also in books.
Right. Dude, there's a line in here that I laughed out loud when I read it, and I couldn't believe it when you said there needs to be a 23andMe too service. I almost dropped the book because I didn't see it coming. You were talking about, family lines and history, and 23andMe too. I'll let you say it.
Yeah, so basically Sean Price, his dad gets him this DNA kit for his birthday because he's adopted and wants to connect with him. And they end up finding out they're native. There's percentage native, and he's trying to get ahead of his dad because his dad's kind of problematic. And he's like, well, what about it? He claims to be trying to lighten the mood, but he's really trying to get under his dad's skin. What about if there's a 23andMe too, where you can find out how many known rapists you have in your family line?
Dad did not appreciate that joke.
He did.
It's the kind of play you can do now and introduce the subject to people who maybe just didn't want to do it. I think people are inherently, regardless of native or not, white or not, people are just inherently, they want to avoid conflict in any way they can and avoid being uncomfortable. And so when you brought that up, I went, what a brilliant way to bring up the truly uncomfortable and historically sound point of view.
Well, also, there's this story that you hear about the native princess grandmother. Like it's often grandmother. And there's a reason why, because there was rapes of women. You don't hear that many, like my grandpa, my great grandfather.
That's right.
You hear a lot of this female version, and there's a reason for that.
Right. Where did that line come from?
The 23andMe too.
Yeah.
Just in writing the dialogue.
You were just sitting there.
Yeah, it just came out.
Did you pause for a minute and think?
I don't always know when something's good until it takes a while.
Was it when we started seeing ourselves reflected back that we this need for identity and what it is and who we are, where do we come from? Has that always been part of in your research, part of who we are?
I mean, I think, so when they consolidated white people, like Italians and
all Euros,
in order to consolidate power and for the vote, there was a major loss that was never grieved and never really revived. And so
for individual cultures.
Like you just became a white American. There's not really, and that's why the emphasis on the forefathers and the Constitution and guns is so prevalent, because that's a thing to rely on. That's your cultural sort of life way. There's not that much else to it. And, then as you get more into the modern day, you're like losing Columbus and you're losing, some of the dignity of what you used to rely on.
What you were taught.
And you're also sort of seeing, and this isn't my words, but this feeling like being a minority is now cooler and being a white person is questionable. And I think in that people are like, well, that's not all that I am. And so you do these tests and you can be like, see, I'm also part of what you are. It's sad. But we've never mourned as a country this erasure of like legitimate, long-standing cultures.
The experience for you having success now, because I've watched people who I've interviewed over the years who realize that, I told this story when nobody knew who I was, and now I'm starting to get success. And now I'm a guy who can sell a TV show. How far removed am I from the guy that knows these experiences authentically? How are you navigating all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like musicians who they stop being able to write about the material, and they're just writing about being on tour. It's not really relatable, right?
No. Which you haven't done here.
But in my next book, I do go into some of that. I do have a character who's an author, and there is some of that material I can mine sort of at an early stage, but I can't continue to do that.
Right.
I'm working. I finished a screenplay that's with the studio, and it's totally original screenplay. It has nothing to do with the books.
Right.
So there's the adaptation for TV for there. There's original screenplay. This next book has a theme of Pretendians. So I'm digging into all this stuff for the next book. And so there's a lot of material that I think it's interesting that won't allow that I lose touch, because I think there's still a lot to talk about and it's really genuine.
So the next book is leaning on the Pretendians?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, you got to get that out sooner. Can't be
I know.
fixed. Yeah.
I know. There's a piece that feels timely to it.
Right.
But it was the same thing with the residential schools. I was writing about it before it started happening in the news. And I started this Pretendians book before the Buffy thing came out.
Right.
And now, I have a Google alert for Pretendians, and once a week something comes up.
In your words, can you, because I think people maybe don't understand what it might feel like for you. I follow enough people on Instagram where that's my version of a Google alert, and you'll just see it and go, "Oh no, really? I could never." I've interviewed Buffy a million times. I'm in the documentary about her, like many people are, and it wouldn't even occur to me. What does it feel like?
I think the reason I am writing about it in a novel is because it feels, it's this deep level of betrayal, and all these histories of not being represented or being misrepresented, and it's a figurehead, people that are doing this and taking advantage. It's like the embodiment of the betrayal, that is connected to a lot of what's wrong with representation of Native people in the country. So I think it's a really complex feeling that I'm still trying to figure out.
Right.
And, I've been trying to listen to as many things about it in the news and on podcasts. And I think other Native people are in a similar place. The Buffy thing, I think, was the peak moment that people are coming down from.
Yeah.
Because she was huge. I mean, she still is.
As big as maybe it gets.
For a Native musician, there's never been anything close.
No, first Academy Award, it's Sesame Street, right? And lots of good work, but I can't even, the deep level of betrayal must be. So you're going to write that. That's going to be interesting.
We'll see.
Tell me about the school you went to in New York. Is it the Bronx you went to talk to kids?
Yeah.
And what those conversations were like.
So they designed it. The teacher, who this, super passionate teacher, designed it so that I would come in and kind of hear them talk about it. And that was, an incredible thing. Young people, when I first started touring, just scared the hell out of me. I felt like being in high school again, and just they're going to judge me and whatever.
Being judged by like a 17-year-old.
Yeah. But I've been around enough young people to where when I went into this, I just feel like, they're the sweetest. And it's a different generation of kids. And so hearing them talk about the book is how it started when I walked in, and they're like connecting over, experiences that are like theirs, and they genuinely love the characters. Like we passed kids in the hall, and the teacher was like, "Who's your favorite character?" And they had like three different answers, different kids in a single.
Connected to the trauma, didn't they?
Yeah, that was part of what they were connected to. Just people in books bringing up like that family members have substance abuse or mental health problems. Like that's something that was relatable to them. And, there's a certain kind of book that has been become curriculum or is part of the canon that's taught that just people can't relate to. And so the kids that I was most touched by were like, I don't read books. Mm-hmm. And like, I love this. Because if you can turn somebody on to one book, there's other books out there for you.
You brought up substance abuse. I read a quote from you that kind of was amazing. As much as it's been terrible for you, it's been a blessing too, drinking or alcohol. And I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex thing. I think there's a lack of compassion sometimes and lack of consideration of all the complexity that goes into why people go to these things.
Yeah.
And, some of the characters in the book are going to it to feel something.
Yeah.
And that's not, usually it's like you're hiding or you're numb or you're running from something. And I think it's played, multiple roles in my life. And I'm one of the people who had to learn that like, I can't go there.
Yeah.
And there's all these different, along a spectrum, people that understand their relationship to substances and the risks, and especially if it's in your family, and that's real. And so I was wanting to write about it in a way that I hadn't seen it written about, because anybody who knows, like, it's a complex subject and it deserves to be looked at in a complex way. And that's what novels, I think, are really good at.
In the book you mentioned, John Trudell comes up, and I remember, his name came up a lot when I was at Standing Rock, and it's only a few decades since, right? The 60s, the 70s, whatever, relatively speaking. But it's definitely changing in the conversation with diversity and inclusion. People don't believe in the same history, the same facts, the way they teach history. You can't teach slavery in some states now. You can't critical race theory. It's like progress was happening. And then somewhere around 6 years ago, whoever were the quiet ones, they're the loud ones. Mm-hmm. the stakes are different for you. And I just wonder what when you read all that, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it feels like we are headed toward a precipice and completely divided and against each other at once.
Yeah.
With like the looming AI that is, potentially going to wipe all creatives out, in addition to a lot of other jobs along the way.
Right.
With climate change, which is the precipice. So I don't, I try to take the approach of like trying to enjoy what we can while we can.
Right. Yeah.
Because I did a lot of doom scrolling and doom thinking and doom feeling during the pandemic, and try to do the work that helps, and you try to enjoy what you can.
Yeah.
And that's all you can do, I think.
We're going to do an anniversary thing on Standing Rock. What do you remember from when because, as you know this, almost never were any of these things covered in the news. But that started to get a little bit of not much, but indie media started to cover it. I remember going there, seeing how big it was and what was happening on the anniversary when it comes up. But what did you think of? How did that connect to you?
Well, yeah, I was working in this media center that I started up at the Native American Health Center, where I worked for 8 years, and where a lot of my experience that went into there that came from. So it was huge in the Native community. It was very loud.
Yeah.
You were seeking it out. If you weren't seeking it out, you were maybe seeing some headlines in the news.
Barely.
So for me, it was a huge moment. And it was also the success of there, the timing of it is directly related to Standing Rock. So our invisibility problem has always been tied to these revivals or renaissances. And they've also been tied to these big public moments. So like the occupation of Alcatraz was a national TV moment. Yeah. And, Nixon was aware of it and talking about it. And that was when Trudell was, peak of his power in a way. After that came a kind of renaissance, and more visibility sort of died away. After Dances with Wolves swept the Oscars, as ridiculous as that sounds, there was a moment that was followed by people wanting the public interest piece. So Standing Rock was that moment. Yeah. And between Standing Rock and Trump getting elected, it went out big like it did because of that. So Standing Rock was, pivotal for a lot of reasons for me. It was an important moment to see Native people standing up like that. I knew a lot of people that went out there. And, but it really like there rode the sort of aftermath of Trump getting into power and that movement ending. Right. And people wanting to respond. Part of that was, them reading there or it being acquired by it.
You see more and more of it now. You see, more about land claims, more about resources, storytellers and writers in media, even journalism. They're more attuned to it than the previous generation was. So I don't know what the word hopeful means in this context for change, but do you have to remain hopeful that it will?
I think with visibility and storytelling happening on all these different levels, as long as that keeps happening for Native people, it's going to mean good things. Yeah. I do have that hope.
So good to see you, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. You good? That was awesome, man. Thank you.